Hi, everybody. This is Rob Packard from Medical Device Academy, and today's webinar is going to be our procedure webinar for non-conforming procedures or non-conforming product procedure. It's SYS-023. This is the procedure where we cover how to identify, segregate, and disposition non-conforming product, as well as rework the non-conforming product. Sorry for a little bit of the late start here, but I've got to make a few adjustments here. I think we're going to be all set. Okay. So I'm going to jump into the slides, and as we go through it, I'm going to show you slide by slide what's included in the procedure and explain how to make, how to review the procedure, make minor edits, and then implement the procedure for your quality system if you're implementing it for the first time. So when you purchase this procedure, this comes included with a training on non-conforming product. So that's what that first folder is. It says 9 control of non-conforming product. That's the original training that we provided for non-conforming product, and it covers it in general, not just with our procedure. The second folder, that's empty right now, but we're going to be putting this recording in that folder, and it's going to include how to review, edit, and implement this procedure for your quality system. The other documents, we have a report. So this, when you have non-conforming product, you fill in a form. That's the report form. Second thing, whenever you have non-conforming product, you typically keep a log of that, including product that's returned is normally treated as non-conforming product until it's inspected and potentially decontaminated if it's been used. And then the PowerPoint is this PowerPoint presentation that I'm walking you through. And then we have the procedure that's highlighted. We have the thumbnail that was used for announcing that we're having this webinar. So that's all the content that's included in there. That temporary file just goes away once I've closed the file. I hadn't closed it when I took the screen capture. For the requirements to comply with ISO 13485, they're covered in section 8.3 of the standard. So clause 8.3, 8.31 and 8.32 and 8.34 are what this procedure covers directly. 8.33 is covered to a certain extent, but you actually have to go to the recall or corrections and removal procedure to get the rest of it. So even though I have 8.33 in here, it's just when you have non-conforming product that is left your facility, once you have initiated the recall and requested people send it back to you, when you receive that, that's going to be return product. Some of that might be used, some of it might not be. While you're receiving that, you're going to put that in quarantine and can treat it as non-conforming product, and you may sort through it. You may rework some of that product. You may scrap it. Depends on what's wrong with it and how it needs to be fixed. But a recall, the only real difference between 8.33 and 8.31 and 8.32, 8.31 and 8.32 are what you do when the product is still in your control, and 8.33 is what you're doing when it leaves your control. You've already shipped it to a distributor or to the end customer. For the FDA regulations, up until February of 2026, this is what is required for non-conforming product. It covers the same content, except for the part about product that's been recalled. The last part, 82090B2, that's for rework. And the other parts are aligned with 8.31 and 8.32. But this is explaining how you have to identify the non-conforming product, you have to segregate it, you have to determine the disposition. And one of the things that they're always looking for whenever an auditor looks at one of these procedures or an FDA inspector, they're always looking for, have you done a risk justification for use as is? And if you're doing any rework, have you considered the adverse effects of the rework? So those are two things that they're always looking for. And that adverse effects of rework, you can find at the bottom of the procedure here. So it says it right here. Whoop, I didn't put on the highlighter correctly. Sorry. So, whoop, I'm going to go back a slide now. Adverse effects of the rework on the product. That's what they're looking for in the procedure somewhere. And then the other piece that they're looking for is an evaluation of risk. That's not in the regulation, but you will find it in 1345. And both of those things they're looking for to be addressed somewhere in your procedure. This is a checklist that we include with all our trainings on our procedures. We explain how this is step-by-step what you're going to do to review and edit the procedure so it fits your quality system at your company instead of being generic. So number one, change the logo from our company's logo to your company's logo. Update the version number. So we have 0.8 for this procedure. You're going to make it 1.0. And when you make a revision, you're going to make it either 1.1 for a minor revision, like a typo, maybe a clarification, maybe a change of a title. And then if you're making a significant revision that requires some retraining, you're going to change it to 2.0. The effective date, there are two ways of handling that. One could be the effective date is the date you approved it. The second way could be the effective date of this is the date that we're going to have all the people's training done. So we're going to release it, we're going to approve it and release it, and then we're going to give people 30 days to get trained on it, and then we'll make it effective. I prefer a different approach. I prefer to train people before I've approved it so they have an opportunity to give me feedback on it before it becomes official. By doing it that way, oftentimes I find certain things that weren't clear to them but are clear to me because I'm the author that need to be tweaked in the final version of the procedure. So before I leave training, I make sure it's all redlined and everybody agrees to the changes we've made. I may even print out another copy so they see the final version without the red lines. Another thing that we might do is if there are any forms that are laid out in a different order than the order that they do the tasks, or there isn't enough space in a form for entering information, we might expand some of the cells in a form to make more room for them, to make it easier and neater to record your results. For the author, it's whoever made the most recent revision. So whoever's going to review our procedure, make edits, and implement it for the first time, that's the author. If they delegate that to one of their subordinates to make minor revisions in the future, that's the new author. And you're just showing who the author is of that revision. So you could have multiple authors very quickly because multiple people made revisions over time. You want to update the company name. Anywhere you see company name in brackets, you're going to replace that with your company name and delete the brackets. You're going to, anywhere you have references to our procedures, if you bought our turnkey quality system, you leave that alone. If you only bought a couple of our procedures, then you're going to need to modify our procedure numbers and all the cross-references to our procedures to match your procedure numbering. For the flow chart, same thing. Any references to our procedures or what's included in that flow chart, you're going to have to modify that to match your quality system procedure numbers if you're not buying our complete system. If you are, then you could just delete the ones that might not apply because you might not have all the procedures. For example, if you don't have a sterile product, you delete anything about sterility. For the titles, these are titles of people that are or functions that are listed in the procedure. If you have a quality manager, but you don't call them a quality manager, maybe you call them a VP of Regulatory Affairs or a Vice President of Quality and Regulatory or a compliance manager. Whatever their title, you're going to replace what we put in there for quality manager with whatever title you're using. There is nothing in the regulations that says you have to use this title, except in the case of manager reviews. They expect you to define who the manager representative is. Just like in Europe, they have a requirement for a person with regulatory responsibility. That's also a title. So if there's an official regulatory title, that's going to be spelled out in one of the procedures, like manager review. But in this procedure here, there aren't any titles that are spelled out in the regulations. So you decide what the titles are going to be. And you can pick what wording you want to fit the size and scope of your operations at your company. For the training and retraining, you want that to match. And usually the way we make sure that all the training and retraining documentation is lined up properly, we usually fill out the training matrix that lists all the titles and has all the functions and the things that people need training on before we actually do the quality manual. So we first do the training matrix, then we fill in the quality manual, and then we fill in the rest of the procedures, just to make sure the titles are correct throughout. And it also helps us think, what people do we need to have trained on this? Who's going to be the process owner? Who are they going to delegate to? So looking at a high level of the training matrix is really helpful for picking titles and deciding what people need training on what. The next section is metrics. We have suggested metrics in the procedure. You can pick your own metrics. Every process, you decide what you're going to measure. We have suggested ones, but a subset of those should be your quality objectives. So not everything is important to a company at all times. Sometimes you'll start with a quality objective, and then over time you'll reduce the things that you were measuring and add new things to measure instead as new quality objectives. But every process should have some metrics, and only some of those are worthy of a quality objective. The next thing is the record storage locations. You're going to have either a paper-based system where you define where the binders are that you're saving these copies that are hard copies, or you're going to have a virtual quality system where you have a hyperlink that points you to a specific location in a shared drive. Maybe it's Dropbox, maybe it's Box, maybe it's in your own file transfer protocol site. But wherever that location is that you want people to save things, that's what you're putting in here if it's a virtual system. And if it's an EQMS, you've validated the software to automatically put it in the right location. You don't have to specify because it's done automatically. The last thing is any references in here to other countries only apply if you do work in that country. So if you don't sell it in the EU, then you can delete all the EU references. If you don't sell it in Canada, delete all the Canadian references. If you don't sell in the US, delete the US references. So it just depends on what countries you're going to be doing business in. This first section of the procedure, now we're actually showing you screen captures of the procedure, is purpose and scope. And I actually, because it didn't all fit very nicely on the page, what I did is I took this section that's color-coded and gives the cross-references to different regulations that was at the end of the scope section. I moved it over to the left where I had more space. But that's at the end of the scope section in the procedure. And as you can see here, we have references to FDA regulations. We have references to European regulations, 1345. And Matthew's even been kind enough to put in some color coding for company name to highlight, hey, you need to put your company name in here. And he explains when he used red text and green text throughout the procedure. This is where we have references to regulations and standards. So we have the EU regulations, we have the EU standard, we have an international standard, that's the ISO 1345-2016 without the EN, and then we have the FDA 21 CFR 820. And then we have what are the inputs and outputs to this process based on procedures as well as forms. For the approval section, quality manager is usually approval of every procedure, because they're responsible for the entire quality system and need to make sure that there isn't something in the procedure that conflicts with some other part of the quality system. So that's the one person that usually has that role and responsibility. It might be different in your company. It might be a regulatory person, or it could be somebody in charge of document control. But then there's usually a second person that's in charge of the process. But in the case of non-conforming product, a lot of times that is also the quality manager. So that's why in this one, we just have the quality manager listed, but you could very easily have the quality manager and somebody else that's responsible for non-conforming product, such as maybe a quality engineer or maybe somebody in operations. You decide. And then we have the revision history. So as I said, Matthew Walker was the one that made this particular version. I don't know who made 0.7 or 0.6, but Matthew had made a lot of the revisions to this to add in cross-references and color coding and different regulations. And he also added symbols to make it easier for you to search for what regulation is applicable. This next section, responsibilities and authorities, we list several different roles here. Typically on a material review board of non-conforming product, where you're trying to decide what's applicable and what's not, whether you can accept it, whether you can ship it back to your vendor. Typically, you're going to have 4 different roles. So you're going to have somebody from quality, somebody from engineering, somebody from purchasing. You might have somebody from operations, and one last role. If you had a 5th one, it would be accounting. This one, we kind of had the operations combined with the engineering or the purchasing. You could do it either way. It depends on how small your company is. The only reason for including the finance is if you go to scrap a lot of product on a specific order and you have a public company, you're going to need to be very careful about how you do that because you're scrapping an asset. And so that usually requires some reporting responsibilities, and they want to be careful about when they do that. Sometimes they want to spread it out over time so they can manage that a little bit better. I've seen that done in different larger companies. They have a $1 million recall or something. They go scrapping that product out. They might do it a small amount at a time and spread it out just so the assets don't suddenly disappear from the books. In section 7.1 of the procedure, that's where we covered non-conforming product and how to manage it. The basic elements of it are in bold. So number 1 is identification. Whenever you have non-conforming product, you want to identify it. You can label it, you can bag it, you can tag it, you can, however you're going to do it. Some people put a red mark across things, people put an X on it, people put a sticker on it, people put in a red bin. Identify is the key. How do you identify it so it can't be confused by anybody? They know that this is non-conforming product. They need to know that. In the next section, they have segregation. That's 7.110. Segregation is how you physically prevent it from being mixed with conforming product when it may not be adequately identified. So if you do both identification and segregation, you've got 2 controls to prevent the bad product from being mixed with the good product. So segregation, you might put it in a red bin, you might put it in a locked cage, you might put it in a roped area, you might put it what I used to tell people is, let's put the red bins on the floor so we have a work surface we're working on. Good parts are on the table. Parts we're inspecting are on the table. Bad parts are always down below the table. So that's another way to segregate things. And then you have the evaluation process. Now that you've segregated it, at the end of the shift, at the end of the production lot, at the end of the month, whatever your cycle is for reviewing these, you would get all the non-conforming parts that have been labeled and segregated. You would get together as an MRB team and you would decide, well, what disposition do these parts get? Do we keep them? Do we rework them? Do we scrap them? What's going to be the status? Do we return them to our vendor that made them for us? And the faster you can disposition your product, evaluate and disposition from the time that it was created, the better. I skipped over that bold on 7.1.9 documentation. Every single step of the process is going to be documented. You have a non-conforming material report form that you're going to fill in. So when you initiate that, that's what that step is. But you're going to keep on filling in that documentation as the process goes until it's complete in the final disposition has been implemented, whether it's a return to vendor or it's a scrap or use it as whatever it is. In this next section, we have reworker products. So this is section 7.2. Whenever you're reworking product, and I think I skipped this section. Yes, I skipped disposition. So I must have just skipped over a slide accidentally. Sorry about that. So for disposition, we have 4 different dispositions. Scrap, that's self-explanatory. Usually it's just accounting and whoever's responsible for the non-conforming process have to approve that. Use as is requires more of a risk justification. So you want it, what is the potential for this to cause harm? Is it just cosmetic, or is it something that could cause harm in some way or cause the device not to work correctly? So use as is usually requires an engineering person that was developing the product to sign off on that, as well as quality. The rework disposition, that's going to be a little bit more complicated. Not only do you have to consider the adverse effects of the rework, you also have to write a procedure for it. It has to be approved by the same people that approved the original procedure for that process. And you're also going to have to identify if there are any additional inspection techniques that you're going to have to perform. So those are a couple of different things on why you're going to have to, what things you're going to have to document. They have one last disposition there, return to supplier. You might think that that would be as low risk as scrap, but one of the things you got to be careful of, you can't just automatically ship things back to vendors. Usually they want an RMA number or an RGA number assigned so they know it's okay to accept the return product. They won't just let you return it. They want to know that it's coming and say, yes, that's okay to return. So usually whoever the buyer was has to contact the vendor and get that approval and a number, and maybe even some special shipping instructions on how it should be labeled and how it should be shipped before it's returned. They may even say, you know, please don't return it. Please just scrap it because it costs too much to ship. So communication between whoever's in purchasing and the supplier is key. We have a comment here from one of our customers or somebody else that's watching us live, maybe even a note why. So if you could clarify what you meant by that question, that would be very helpful as to where you're thinking that we would put why. I'm guessing that we're talking about why you had non-conforming product. So that's covered in the form. It actually has a place to explain what the nonconformity is. If you determine that you're going to, you have too much nonconforming product, you might decide to open up a CAPA and investigate the root cause for why that nonconforming product is coming. Another thing that you might be looking at is documenting why you decided which disposition it's going to be, why it's okay to use as is, why you're reworking it, whichever disposition you've picked. Thank you, Paul, for letting me know which one you were looking for. Okay, so Paul said I answered it in disposition. So excellent. The next section here is rework. So in rework, this is something that not all products have. So if you have a sterile product, it's all packaged up and sterilized, and you found something wrong with it, unless it's on the outside of the sterile barrier, you're probably not going to be able to rework it easily. And you would have to sterilize the product again and package the product again. In some cases, they say that's not allowed. In some cases, if you tried to rework something, you would actually ruin the product. So certain times, certain companies, rework is not an option, and they don't even have this section. So that could be the case for your company. You could say, nope, we don't allow rework. However, in almost every company I've ever visited, they almost always have some sort of labeling that gets revised and amended if somebody accidentally made out a label incorrectly. So changing the date on something, changing the lot number on something. There's usually some kind of relabeling that will occur at some point in a company's history. So I would be very careful before I just said, oh, we're just going to eliminate that whole section, not allow rework. You can do that, but you may find there's a whole lot of product you'd really like to be able to relabel, and that would fall under rework. So relabelings is rework too. And I maybe glossed over it quickly. When you do rework, you need to make sure you write a procedure on how to do the rework, and you need to make sure you segregate and identify that product as reworked so it doesn't get mixed in with all your other product that might look exactly the same. Okay, the next section is monitoring and measuring. So one of the things that you're looking at is monitoring of how much scrap you have. Where is the non-conforming product coming from? One of the things that I've found in many of the companies I've been at, you have certain processes that generate a lot of scrap. Sometimes it's just the nature of that process results in a lot of scrap. But sometimes there's an opportunity there to improve the yield of the process, reduce the amount of scrap, reduce the amount of mistakes that operators make. So you want to look very closely at that. And that's why we say do a statistical analysis of not just how much scrap or rework you have, but where it's coming from. That's important as well. What shift is it happening on? Which operators are resulting in that? Maybe just retraining one person is all you need to do to eliminate a lot of scrap that might be occurring downstream from that person rather than right at their operation. So that's one of the things you need to be careful of is sometimes the rework or the scrap or the non-conforming product is discovered after the step that actually caused it. Other things you're going to look at is, do we need a kappa for this? So you may decide there's an improvement. That might be something you want to document as a formal kappa. You might want to do revalidation of the process if you're going to change it to eliminate some sort of quality problem. You might also want to look at effectiveness of that new process to see if it really eliminated the problem altogether or not. So those are some of the things you want to look at in your monitoring and measuring of the process. And non-conforming products should be also reviewed at your manager reviews. The next section is on training and retraining. As with all our procedures, we say if it's a 0, it's a draft procedure. If it's a 1.0, that means it's initial release of the procedure and you need training on it. If it's a minor revision, no retraining is required. It goes to 1.1. If it's a major revision, it goes to 2.0. So if there's a number after the decimal, that's telling you whether retraining or not is required. The next section is a risk management section. To show that we have a risk-based process, we explain what risk controls we put in place to make sure that this is appropriate. You always want to be looking at dispositions. How are we going to control the disposition? So remember, you have to have rework is going to be approved by the same people that reviewed the process before, when the original process. If not additional people. You additionally need, and it could be different people, just the same functions. In addition to that, if you have use as is, you have to have a justification that is risk-based. If you have scrapping a product, you want to give accounting an opportunity to say, is there any other way that we can use this before we go scrapping it? If you're going to return product, you want to notify your vendor of it. So every single one of these steps, there are some risk controls in place. And the more severe it is, the more controls you're going to want in that to identify, segregate, and prevent it from being used accidentally. And this is the records section. If you have a non-implant, you want to keep those products for 10 years. That's based on the European guidelines. If you're not doing any European distribution, you could reduce those timelines, but it should be at least as long as the product plus 2 years, or not less than 2 years. So that's how long you're keeping the records for. If you have digital records only, then what you're going to do is you're going to say in the procedure that you could still delete them after so long. But most companies that have digital records only, they're keeping them indefinitely, and that's acceptable. I also get the question, well, if we start out paper-based and then we scan the documents, after you've verified you've scanned them and you have them in the proper location, then you could destroy the paper records. And you want to have a record that you've destroyed them. So that takes us, I believe, to the end of the procedure. This is just a slide that gives you my contact information if you have any questions. We're also going to be doing a live webinar on this Friday. Every Friday we do live streaming videos. If you want to schedule an appointment with me, there's a calendar link there, and that mobile number there also works for WhatsApp. So I hope this was helpful to you. And if you purchase this procedure, you also have the training on non-conforming material, which covers it even more detail than I covered this time. So I hope this was helpful to you, and have a great day.